Welcome to another edition of Grace Under Pressure, where my guest today is an old friend and someone I admire greatly, Chester Elton. Welcome, Chester.
Great. Thanks, John. Delighted to be your guest.
Great. Grace Under Pressure, as those of you who have watched the show know, it's a way to pose questions to thought linkers and thought leaders and doers like Chester, whose ideas and actions are helping us come to a greater understanding of ourselves and the opportunities around us. Grace Under Pressure reveals sometimes the stuff that we kind of forget about, the soft stuff like caring, connecting, and commitment we feel toward others. Grace for me is the generosity we show others, the respect we deliver, and the compassion we demonstrate. And when you do it as a leader, especially in our challenging times, it requires the ability to act for others and energize everyone around us. It's happy to be with my guest, Chester Elton. So welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for the invitation.
I want to tell folks a little bit about you. I love the way your bio begins. It says, want to get results. and that's Chester, because for more than 2 decades, he has been helping companies to explore their strategy, vision, and values. Their expertise in the company that he co-founded with Adrian Gostick is the Culture Works, and they engage employees in these issues, and they inspire others. If you ever have the chance to listen to or watch Chester, please do, because the energy is palpable. He has been called fascinating by Fortune and creative and refreshing by the New York Times. He and Adrian Gostick have had 3 New York Times, Washington, or Wall Street Journal Post bestsellers. Their newest is Leading with Gratitude, which just coincidentally, Chester happens to have a copy of. Gosh, isn't that it? Chester was ranked number 4 by Global Gurus in organizational culture and number 2 in organizational culture. So he is well-renowned and just a terrific guy. And I have to confess that every time I get around Chester, I always laugh, and I have this irresistible urge to tease him about something. So I don't know if that says something about his warm and personality or just my deviousness. So anyway, welcome, Chester.
Thanks. I'm the youngest of 5 brothers, so I grew up being teased. So just count you as one of my brothers. I do want to make a little correction because my mom's not here to correct you. Adrian and I have actually had 5 New York Times bestsellers and 7 Wall Street Journal bestsellers. So
thank you. So,
treat me with a little more respect, John.
Shame on me. Shame on me. Anyway, Chester, we're going through tough times. So what are you hearing from your clients? You actually are out speaking, believe it, in real life. So what's the mood and what are you hearing?
Well, it is, and you've heard it a million times, unprecedented, unusual, extraordinary times we live in. I'll tell you, the leaders that are really talking to me are saying, look, how do we keep people engaged? How do we keep them focused? There are so many distractions. People are worried about their jobs. They're worried about educating their kids. They're worried about their health. They're worried about their parents. They're worried about their communities. If you're an employee of color, you're worrying about the social and racial injustices that's going on there. 2020, who'd have thunk it, right? And then on top of all that, apparently there's a meteor coming too. So, and the fires in California and the inland hurricanes in Iowa. So it's extraordinary, all the distractions. And so leaders are saying, look, how do we get people to show up and be engaged? So many are working from home. Those that are coming to work are masking up. And how do we keep them safe? And over and above all of that, how do we then get them to focus on what we're trying to do, why it's important, and get it done at a level that our customers expect from us? So, yeah, there's a lot going on for me.
Right. And some of this, and what's so revealing about your work is some of it's just very basic, simple behavior. And I don't mean that flippantly, but it's our focus. Am I correct?
Yes, Adrian, my wonderful co-author, know very well. I always say I'm Robin to his Batman, is that it is common sense. Unfortunately, it's uncommonly practiced. And, now more than ever, what we're seeing, and I'm sure you're seeing it as well, is that when you go through any kind of a crisis or transition, it doesn't have to be a pandemic, although that's where we are now. It can be merger, acquisition, it can be a move, whatever it is. two things need to go up exponentially. And the first one is communication. You can't over communicate. We always laugh with the executives we coach that if you think you're communicating too much, it's probably about right. Because in that void, if you're not constantly communicating, the voids get filled. And at work, it gets filled with rumor, innuendo, and fear. Right. And none of those are productive. The second thing that needs to go up is gratitude. And the reason being is and it plays into communication as well, right? That if I'm working from home, there's a fear that I'm going to be forgotten, left out. I'm not in the loop. So you fill that void with communication. Here's where we are. Here's how we've adjusted where we're going to go. Here are the new tools you're going to need to realize those goals. And by the way, thank you so much for all you're doing to keep all this distraction and whatnot aside so that you can do your job. Simple expressions of gratitude. I'm remembered. I believe what I do matters. I make a difference. And when I make a difference, it's noticed and celebrated, are powerful ways to keep your people engaged and focused.
I'm glad you linked communication and gratitude. And there's another element, I think, and you guys talk about it in the book, Leading with Gratitude, is the concept of listening. Would you not say listening is a form of gratitude, or at least in a form of respect?
What was that? I'm just kidding. I'm kidding.
You got me on that one.
It's an old joke, but it never gets old. There's no question. We talk about leaders that want to engage their employees, particularly that are remote, to be intentional and disciplined. So be intentional about connecting with them and asking questions like, how are you doing today? Right? Because today could be a bigger mess than yesterday. What can I do to help? And the third question that I really like is, what do you think? Like, what do you think about this issue? What do you think? And then to your point, listen and let people tell you their stories and their situations. That, as leaders, so often we want to jump in right away and give the solution and be the smartest person in the room. When in reality, what people are really needing right now, more than ever, I think, is to have their voices heard, have their opinions matter. And then the discipline that comes in is make sure you're touching base on a regular basis. So right. How are you doing today? How can I help? What do you think? Be intentional about those questions. Listen carefully, and then have the discipline to do it on a regular basis.
I like the fact you mentioned the thinking. What are you thinking? And there's another element to that. And it was a previous guest, a very successful executive, Jim Howden, with Root Inc. And he talks about co-thinking, which is thinking with his employees to come up with better ideas. It's the precursor in a way to co-creating. And it's a great way of melding ideas, I think. So.
Yeah, we Adrian and I worked for a CEO at a larger organization years ago, and we had this great moment when he said, "Look, I think I'm a pretty smart guy. In fact, I know I'm a smart guy." Right? He's the CEO, and he said, "And by myself, I can solve some problems, and I can be smart. Collectively, we can be Einstein." And I thought that was such a great, permission that he gave all of us to start thinking like Einstein. And, one person can be smart, a collective can be genius.
That permission is so important. And because it makes it, when folks see the CEO do this, then it's, I better be upping my game. And it's the example of the leader. And I think sometimes leaders don't really, especially if they're top of the house, don't really realize the influence they have, And Eisenhower used to talk about how much greater a golfer he was when he was president.
Yeah.
When he's retired.
He had AIDS kicking his balls out of the rough.
Exactly.
I think this is such an important concept, John, and we talk about it often, that, the way you act as a leader really does give permission for people to act the same way. If you are a screamer, you will create screamers. If you cheat on your expenses, your people will cheat on their expenses, and if you are a leader that is not forgiving, that doesn't give, on your wonderful book, if doesn't give anyone grace, they will not be forgiving, and they will not, tolerate mistakes. And you create a very toxic culture. as opposed to when you have a leader that does lead with gratitude, leads with listening, leads with grace. Now you've created a safe space for people where they can make a mistake and it doesn't end their career. You know, you and I both know the wonderful CEO of WD-40, Gary Ridge. Do you know what comes in travel size? I never leave home.
I've got two of them.
Yeah. Well, the thing I love about the name WD-40, which a lot of people have it, they don't know what it means. It stands for Water Displacement 40th Formula. And what I love about that is there were 39 iterations of that formula before they got it right. Were they mistakes? Gary would argue they were learning moments. And at WD-40, you are not the problem. You have a problem. Let's solve the problem. And it may take us 39 iterations. When we get to it, it's going to be great.
Right.
So, you know, his tribal culture, his culture of it's okay to innovate. And when you innovate, you're going to make mistakes. And you know what? That's okay.
Right.
Let's learn from it. Let's move on. And to me, that it plays so well into what you talk about. When you make a mistake, you give people grace. You give them space. You forgive them, and you move on.
Another leader we know, our friend, led in the same way, Alan Mulally. You know, Alan's whole thing was all about the team, and he taught his leadership team at Ford by example. Hey, a problem is an opportunity, and it's not for me to solve; it's for us to solve. But more specifically, hey, Chester, that's your area, and John, that's your area. Why don't you guys work together? And you know. Over time, people learn to cooperate. And what a novel concept.
Exactly. You know, we interviewed Ellen for the book, and we've gotten to know him fairly well as you can for a guy of that stature, right? Yeah. like me and Gandhi, we were tight when I was young. Anyway, he said, you know, when he told that story about trying to get people to buy into this transparency, you know, he'd put these spreadsheets up, and if you were on track, it was green, if you weren't yellow, and then red was you had a problem. Well, nobody was putting up anything that was yellow or red. And at a certain point, I remember he leaned back, he tells a story. He says, you know, I had to remind my people, I said, by the way, we just lost $17 billion this year. How is it possible that everything's green? And finally, Mark Fields from his North American president at Windsor, the Windsor plant was having trouble, put up a red square. And while everybody else in the room thought it was going to end his career, it was Alan that started the slow clap. And as he tells the story, he said, at that moment, I knew we had a shot to turn this around because people were finally safe to admit. And he said, within minutes, people rallied to the cause and we had a solution, and he was back on track in a matter of weeks, as opposed to hiding his mistakes. Right.
And that's a classic example of permission. We talk about permission to fail, but it's the permission to be vulnerable, be open, be honest. And when that comes from the CEO, that sends a long signal. And I know the leaders that you work with exemplify that. So
absolutely. And, you know, and there is a conversion process. You know, Adrian and I are known as the apostles of appreciation. So, you know, we preach and teach this stuff, right? Yeah. One of the great conversion stories that we talk about in Leading with Gratitude, available at fine bookstores everywhere and on Amazon, is Hubert Joly, you know, who took Best Buy from $1 billion deficit to $1 billion surplus. You know, he wasn't always a leader that led with gratitude. It was his personal coach, Marshall Goldsmith. And he said, I'm not getting through to people. Why am I not getting through? I mean, here are the numbers. Here's how we're doing it. And it was Marshall that leaned back and he said, well, they don't follow you because you're a jerk. He used more colorful language, and I know this is a family show. So, and he converted him to create meaningful work, value your people. And I love Hubert finally came out and he said, you know, I may be naive. I think people come to work wanting to do a good job, and in trying to do a good job, they'll make mistakes, and that's okay.
You know, I'm so glad you said that, because sometimes in certain organizations, or maybe in the cultures in which certainly I grew up with, I mean, my management or leadership career, and I've observed, was that it was always, you know, you don't show no feedback. It means you're doing a good job. And it's kind of an us against them, management versus employee versus worker. And you said it right. People don't go to work to fight with their boss. A couple of people do, of course, but I mean, why would you go to work to inflict pain upon yourself? And
Yeah, and we talk about that in the book at length, and it's assume positive intent. This idea of, we assume people are coming in. There is the odd outlier that set a goal and said, I want to be in 3 screaming fights before noon, and if I don't, I'm not doing my job. They're very rare, right? And this idea of when you assume positive intent. Indira Nooyi, the past president or CEO of Pepsi, I loved her approach. She said, when you assume negative intent, everybody and everything is a problem. And it creates a very negative culture. When you assume positive intent, it creates innovation, it creates safety. And she said, I love this. She says, it doesn't just change the way you look at problems, it changes the way you look at people. And when you look at people as, working hard and trying to do a good job, and you value them for that, well, great things can happen. So I love the idea of assume positive intent. By the way, there wasn't one leader that we talked to, whether it was, Alan Mulally or Kent Taylor from Texas Roadhouse, who we've gotten to know, or Indira Nooyi, even Ken Chenault, who had recently retired from American Express. They didn't just lead at work with gratitude. They led in their personal lives with their families, which was so affirming to us. In fact, at the end of the book, we have the baker's dozen. How do you live a grateful life? And their practices with their kids and their spouses was really heartwarming. And it really did affirm that, leading with gratitude isn't just a better way to lead your organization or your team. It's a better way to live.
And
particularly now, there is no separation between life and work. You have one life. Lead it with gratitude.
Exactly. That's the point I was going to say, because there is such, if we're working from home, our family is with us. So there's very little separation. So you better be grateful for something. But seriously, the other thing is that what you're getting to, and you hit on this before, is assuming the best intentions. That's such a powerful concept. But that takes discipline, doesn't it?
So, it does. It's a mindset. And, it's interesting. We've got a wonderful newsletter on LinkedIn called the Gratitude Journal. And the last article I read was, I've got a confession. And it is, I don't always practice what I preach. And to that point, you got to go, and it was a very simple story about dealing with some customer service people. And I was never, I'm not a screamer. I'm not, it was very apparent, though, to these customer service people that what they were telling me was not what I wanted to hear, and it was not making me happy. And I remember hanging up and saying, you know what, Chess, it wasn't so far out of bounds. I don't think anybody hung up and cried. I'm just not that kind of guy. I could have done better. And so when I had the opportunity to re-engage with them, I really changed. And I said, look, I know you've got a tough job. Here's my situation. How can you help? And they rallied like crazy. I got so much more out of those customer service reps by, assuming positive intent and being grateful. And, I'll never forget, it was Candy. We went back 4 or 5 times and we finally got it all figured out. And the ultimate compliment was, she said, Mr. Elton, she said, the only thing that bothers me about solving your problem is we don't get to talk anymore.
Oh, that's a good one. Well, I'll tell you a little story, if you promise not to tell anyone, Chester, but
we're only broadcasting it all over the web. Yeah, go ahead.
I don't always live with grace, and I know that I can be a class A jerk, particularly with customer service people. Yeah. And what I try to do, here's my little discipline, and it drives my wife nuts, because when I prep myself, I'll get on and I'll just be overly gracious. How are you doing? What's going on? That kind of stuff. And she'll say, why are you doing it? It's my way of focus on this. Don't be a jerk.
Right. My dad, who was my inspiration just as a kid, one of the happiest guys I ever met, he would say, happiness is a choice. Choose to be happy. And people loved being around my dad. And he had this great expression. Something would go wrong. And, whether it was they spilled gas at the gas station, or the waitress got his order wrong, or whatever. And they would be, oh, I'm so sorry. And he'd say, stop. If this is the worst thing that happens to me today, trust me, I am way ahead of the game. And everybody just go, oh, thank you so much.
I use that line all the time. It's so powerful. And it just takes the onus, because especially people are trying, especially whether it's and a wait staff or what, customer service, they're not trying to fight with you, but if you're a jerk like me, it just so it's good.
I have a great story for you. When we used to travel a lot, and I traveled.
I don't remember that.
Yeah, it's been a long time. And of course, you get all the privileges. You're platinum this, and you get to go to the President's Club here and the United Club there. I'll never forget. I was trying to get to Columbus, Ohio, and I had to fly through Detroit, and a storm blew in, and I was meeting some sales reps and the whole bit. Finally, I called them and said, "Look, this just isn't going to work. I mean, I'm going to get there at 10 p.m. They can't see us the next day. Let's just call a mulligan and we'll figure out another time I'll come back." Well, so I'm in Detroit and now I want to go back to Newark. I live in New Jersey and I'm going to the President's Club because it's the better place as opposed to standing in line where everybody else is because there's a storm. And there was a guy in front of me and I'm telling you, John, the guy just was ripping this customer service rep up and down. He was with his wife. He was well dressed. He was clearly somebody who was very important, right? And of course, it's not her fault that this storm has blown in. Well, I can't help but overhear because everybody could hear him, right? He's trying to get back to Newark as well. And she's saying, we don't have a seat. We don't have a seat. If you'll just, go and sit down in the President's Club. I've got your information. And finally, the guy just in a huff walks away. And I walked up and said, "Gosh, I'm so sorry." She goes, "It happens. What can I do for you?" I said, "Well, listen, I know it's not your fault. I couldn't help but overhearing. I'm trying to get back to Newark as well. I was supposed to go to Columbus and here's my stuff." She goes, "Not a problem, Mr. Elton. If you hurry, you can make it." I said, "Well, wait a minute. I thought you didn't have a seat." She goes, "Not for that guy. For you, not a problem."
Yeah, that's a good story. So, hey,
I grabbed that thing.
Oh, what a wonderful thing.
And ever is it true, right? It just doesn't pay to be a jerk. It just doesn't.
Now, I'm going to ask you a little bit of a personal question because you are such an extrovert and you are a people person. So how are you doing in our quarantine or our separation? What techniques have you developed?
Yeah, well, I'm doing okay. I am blessed with a phenomenal spouse. Heidi Olson saw fit to say yes to me 37 years ago, and she just has a way of making our home a wonderful place. Whether we have outdoor dinners or we go for walks, and we have something we put in the book. Actually, at the end of the day, we ask each other, what are 3 things you're grateful for? And no matter how isolated you are, at the end of the day, let's face it, you and I, 99% of the world would trade places with us in a heartbeat. We're not worried about clean water or if we're going to eat today, those basics. And so she keeps me very grounded. I love Zoom. I do get zoomed out like everybody else. Hopefully you're staying tuned for this whole set. And it is engaging. I've taken the opportunity to re-engage with a lot of old friends. I grew up in a very spiritual family. And so when people's names pop into my head, I call them or I'll write them a letter or just check in with them. And that's been a wonderful experience for me. I've developed a better discipline about reading more. I've reread Viktor Frankl's, let's get this right, Man's Search for Meaning, phenomenal, timeless book. I'm reading a wonderful book by Jane Goodall, Reason for Hope, which is and by the way, I met this phenomenal guy. I can't stop talking about this book. Jonah Paquette, Awestruck. You'd love this book because it talks about how when you're in a state of awe, whether it's a sunset or a sunrise or looking in the Grand Canyon, it's hard to be stressed and it's hard to be ungrateful. And I want to tell you one more fun story about my dad. And it's in. Did I mention Leading with Gratitude? Yeah.
No, what is the title of that book?
Yeah. Adrian Gosling. We actually have a wonderful free resource website called leadingwithgratitudebook.com. I encourage you to go. Lots of fun videos and stuff. Well, again, leaders give you permission. And I think, you grow up with a great dad. He gives you permission to be a great dad, right? So in our church, there's a lot of volunteer work. And my dad at the time was the volunteer youth minister. And in every congregation, there's always those curmudgeonly people that misery loves company and they want you to be their company, right? So I'll never forget, my brother told me this story. He said, this woman came up to Dad at the end of the services and literally said to him, Brother Elton, you think all the young people in this congregation love you. Well, I'm here to tell you they don't. Just like that. And he looked at her with a big smile and he said, well, thank you very much. And she said, it wasn't a compliment. And he said, too late.
Yeah, I remember you telling me that story, Chester. I'm so glad you shared it because it is so true. And that's your father assuming the best intentions. I mean,
yeah. He said, whenever anybody says to me, I just assume it's a compliment. It's a great compliment.
As we're winding down, you have a passage in the book, Leading with Gratitude, you would like to read because I think it centers what we've been talking about today.
Yes, thank you. And, we were honored to have Marshall Goldsmith, who's a good friend of both you and I, write the foreword. And here are 2 quick paragraphs that I think really sum up a life lived well and lived with gratitude. He says, lots of people struggle with a lack of gratitude. And everyone I've ever met, whether janitor or a billionaire, wants a happy life. No matter who you are, you can easily look for happiness in the wrong place. The great Western disease is I'll be happy when. When I make a certain amount of money, get an award, or complete a task, I'll be happy. What we can all learn is how vital gratitude is for our happiness. The wisest and happiest people I've ever met, Thich Nhat Hanh, the Dalai Lama, and others, talk about and practice deep gratitude. What I notice when I talk with them is how freely they express it. Allowing yourself to feel deeply grateful is how you can do something bold. Be happy now, not later. And I couldn't agree more.
That's a great, it centers the whole idea. And this living for tomorrow all the time traps us, and I know I've fallen victim to that. I'm, of course, but just try to recenter ourselves. As we're winding down, you mentioned the baker's dozen. So what's a couple of things we can take from that, which if I understand it, we can apply to our personal lives?
Exactly. It's the last segment of the book. It's how to live a grateful life. One of the ones I love, and we did this obviously pre-COVID, was when you get home from work, whether you're just walking through the door or you've got a commute, is when you see your family, be happy to see them. Be excited. So often leaders will say, I work 10, 12-hour days. I come home, I'm exhausted. I just want to be off by myself. Well, don't leave your best self at work. These are the people that supposedly mean the most to you. That's why you're working 10, 12 hours a day, right? Be excited to see them. Take an opportunity with your family to talk about hard times. So often, and you do this as well as anyone, you'll interview leaders and you say, tell me about your career. What do they tell you about? They tell you about when they almost went out of business, when they lost all their money, when they're this close from bankruptcy. Why? Because that's where they learned the most. So, with your family, embrace hard times. What are we learning? Not why did this happen to me? What are we supposed to learn? And how can we move forward? And then teach your kids to serve. I love Mr. Rogers. He says, look, whenever you get all the bad news, his mom would say, yes, when you see the bad news, look for the helpers. There's always helpers. Be one of the helpers. So when is there an older family in the neighborhood that needs to be looked in on? Can you collect, rake somebody's leaves, plow their driveway, send them a little note, bring over cookies. These little random acts of kindness are so important to teach your kids when they're young and as a reminder for us as we get older. So yeah, don't leave your best self at work. Bring your best self home. Live a grateful life. Count your blessings. Look out for your neighbors. I always say, look, at the end of all this, I hope we're a little more grateful, that we're a little more kind, that we're a little more patient. And to your point, that we show each other a little more grace, that we're just a little more forgiving. And if that's what comes out of this, I think we're ahead of the game.
That I'm glad you mentioned that forgiving, because that is one of the reasons it sparked me to write Grace, was that our popular culture is gotcha, and some of there are these things that are so slight, just if they're directed to us, as your father did, totally diffused that comment. He could have gotten into an argument with that woman, and to what end? So just thank you.
You're welcome. Well, it's the apostle of appreciation. That's my sermon for the day. Can I get an amen?
Can I get an amen here? All right. We're going to wind up here. And so thank you, Chester. It's been a joy to speak to you today. I love the stories, and we could go on for another 3 hours, but we're not. So we're going to close it out. Thank you. So.